Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in tonight. On behalf of Mitchell Kaplan, the Miami Book Fair, and all of us at Books and Books, I welcome you to a virtual evening with the wonderful Valeria Luiselli to discuss Lost Children Archive, published by Knopf in hardcover and now out in paperback from Vintage. Valeria Luiselli was born in Mexico City and grew up in South Korea, South Africa, and India. An acclaimed writer of both fiction and nonfiction, she's the author of the essay collection Sidewalks, the novels Faces in the Crowd, and The Story of My Teeth, and Tell Me How It Ends, an essay in 40 questions. She's the winner of 2 Los Angeles Times Book Prizes and an American Book Award, and has twice been nominated for the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Kirkus Prize. She has been a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree and the recipient of a Bearing Witness Fellowship from the Art for Justice Fund. She's a 2019 MacArthur Fellow and the winner of the 2020 Vilcek Prize for Creative Promise in Literature. Wow! Lost Children Archive is a book that has meant so much to all of us at Books and Books, but we're not alone. It was one of the New York Times 10 best books of the year, one of Barack Obama's favorite books of the year, and named one of the best books of the year by nearly everyone you can think of. And there's a reason for that. It's amazing. All of you watching can order your copy of Lost Children Archive or any of Valeria's books from Books and Books below by pressing the green button at the bottom of the screen. Every purchase you make keeps Books and Books up and running. So we thank you and we remind you that we need your help now more than ever. We'll begin with a solo presentation by Valeria, and then I'll come back on screen for a short conversation, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So please put in your questions anytime during the broadcast in the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. Valeria really wants to engage with her audience tonight. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Valeria to the stage. Hi, Valeria.
Hi, how are you? Hi, everybody. We were just talking about how weird it is to jump into a screen like this to do these presentations. Like the kind of nerves that one has before a public event often become a kind of energy, a beautiful kind of energy when you walk into the space and there are other bodies there and other faces and eyes that you can look into and engage with, and that kind of energy is just not possible. Like it doesn't flow the way that we are accustomed to it. So it's a very peculiar thing, and I always wonder also on the side of readers, listeners too, that are in events like this one, what it feels like to be there, not be there. I hope we don't get too used to this. It's not ideal, is it? I would like to engage, maybe as a result of this, engage in conversation with those of you who are here listening and watching, or just listening, as soon as possible, because I would like to have some kind of interaction and not just with like this version of me here on the screen. But so I'll just say a few words about how this novel came to be, and move on to hopefully hearing your questions and your thoughts. Let's see, I began writing this novel without knowing that I was writing this novel in the summer of 2014. It was a summer in which I was trying to write something completely different to this novel. I was trying to write about having grown up, having been a child in post-apartheid South Africa, and I was attempting to understand the kind of political myths that generation in South Africa inherited, and then what happened thereafter. So I was thinking about childhood, definitely, and I was thinking again about political myths and foundational myths of countries that have had a turbulent past, like South Africa, like this one. like the USA. But what happened was that in the summer of 2014, I decided to travel with my family across the US in a road trip. And that summer, it came to public knowledge, or it came to public discourse, that hundreds, well, at that moment, tens of thousands of children had arrived alone in the border and were seeking asylum or other forms of immigration relief. Concretely, between October of 2013 and June of 2014, around 60,000 children had arrived, undocumented and unaccompanied. And I just couldn't wrap my head around that idea. The thought of so many children arriving alone, seeking asylum, but then being conceived in headlines as a problem. And so I started taking down note of not the situation itself, but how a narrative was being articulated around what was happening at the border. And more concretely, I was interested in recording or documenting the narrative in local newspapers in Oklahoma or Arkansas, and in the radio, FM and AM in Arizona, or informal conversations at diners and gas stations in Oklahoma, New Mexico. And without knowing, I had somehow began to record as a kind of close, distant witness. The degrees of observation in witnessing in literature are something very complex, but I began kind of approaching this enormous, complex reality as a documenter of it, as a witness of it. At that moment, not a direct witness, but more like a witness of how it was being perceived, as I said earlier, in discourse. When I returned to New York at the end of that summer of 2014, I realized that I couldn't continue being just a witness, and such a distant witness of the circumstance that enraged me and saddened me and shattered my belief system, basically. And so I decided to involve myself more actively, and I did so by becoming a translator in immigration court, not for the court, but for nonprofit organizations who approached families in court to offer immigration aid, basically, and in the best case scenario, pro bono representation for cases. The whole idea that these organizations came up with as a response to what the government was doing back then. And let me just remind you something that's not lovely, which is that this was not the Trump administration, but the Obama administration, who had put forth a very inhumane policy, which was to place all these cases of children in a priority docket in court, meaning they had priority in court to be resolved, meaning children had less time now to defend themselves from a deportation order. Before the policy was set into motion, children had an entire year to find a lawyer that could defend them from deportation. But after this policy, they only had 21 days. So, I mean, just imagine 21. If you have to solve a case against you in 21 days, already for someone who's a citizen and knows people, it would be hard. But imagine a child who had just arrived here. Maybe to live with relatives that were also undocumented. How could children find lawyers so quickly? So these organizations approached the court, the physical space of the court, as a way to offer their help. And they needed volunteers because there were a lot of children, a lot of cases, and not all the lawyers spoke Spanish. So that's how I started working there as a translator in the moment in which children gave their testimonies. At the end, because everything was really understaffed, more than translation, when I learned the protocol of it, I began simply doing the interviews myself, and would note everything down in English, hearing it in Spanish, noting it down in English, and then passing it on to a lawyer who could then find possibly a pro bono lawyer to defend a case. In the meantime, I continued writing about all this, but in a way that by then became really confused and complex and not really fertile. Meaning I had started navigating toward fiction from having just sort of recorded, as I was telling you in this trip, the narratives around the crisis. I began to experiment with fiction as a vehicle for witnessing this situation. And I realized after months that it was the wrong way to go about this, that I was both writing a very asphyxiating book, but not in the right way, asphyxiating, a confused, enraged book, but one in which rage wasn't being like put to a specific use, to put anything in motion. And I was also, more importantly, not doing anything I wasn't doing any justice to the situation itself by fictionalizing immediate raw reality the way I was doing. So I stopped writing the novel completely. I wrote Tell Me How It Ends, which is a short essay that directly observes, it was a direct testimony of what I observed in court in those months. And once I did that, once I wrote Tell Me How It Ends, I was able to understand how to navigate the themes and problems and questions that I was interested in through fiction, in another degree of witnessing, so to speak, in which I wasn't really reporting or offering a direct testimony, but going into, I guess, something that Nadine Gordimer calls the enduring significance that is meaning, meaning as something that goes beyond the immediacy of facts and is something that is revealed in a kind of deeper truth, but not by reporting on the facts, but by accessing kind of the deeper layers of that which is being questioned, perceived, explored through fiction. And I also just was able to see the novel with more freedom, and let it breathe with fictional lungs, so to speak. Excuse the noises outside my window. So that is kind of how I navigated fiction, nonfiction, slowly understanding the role that each genre could play in thinking about political and humanitarian crises like the one involving this diaspora of children. I think I'll end this brief and not so brief framing of the novel here, and I'd love to soon listen to your questions.
Hi, thank you. So, thank you for being with us tonight. Can you hear me? See me?
I can hear you fine. There's the garbage truck right outside. So
okay, that's fine. I can barely hear it. That's the sounds of the city. So actually, now that we're talking about sounds, can we begin with you're telling us a little bit about the role of sound in the book? There was a really interesting quote that you had that made me think it's hearing is a way of touching at a distance.
Mm-hmm.
And sound plays a very big role in this book. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. There's also a beautiful quote in Judith Shalansky's book, The Inventory of Losses, that she says that sound is sight turned inwards. It's similar in the sense that I think both ideas get at something really, really peculiar in sound, which is the the very intimacy of it, the internalization of something. I mean, like literally sound comes inside of us, right? Like frequencies hit our drum. And there's a deep, there's an interiority in the experience of sound that perhaps because of our reliance on sight and our sort of constant relation with the world through sight, we have somehow began to lose touch of. I remember, for example, when in the summer of, it must have been 2017, the summer now in this case within the horrific Trump administration, and where kids were being put in cages and separated as a policy from their parents at the border. And there was someone released, I think ProPublica, if I remember correctly, released a recording of a child who had just been separated from their parents and was crying, but at the same time had it together and kept on telling the officer that she had an aunt, and kept on repeating the aunt's telephone number in the US so that they would call her aunt, and she could make sure that she wasn't lost in the system, like so many children have been lost by this administration in the labyrinths of this dark system. Mm-hmm. And that, I remember I had been by then working on cases, listening to testimonies in person, reading articles. I had by then several years of work, 14, 15, 16, like 3 years of working very closely in this situation. And there was something that audio broke in me that no image had broken inside me before. I remember that audio haunted me deeply to the point where I remember walking. I was doing some research in Italy that summer, and I remember walking in the street and hearing children laugh, and I thought they were crying. You know, like there was something that something really, really haunted me. I think sound has that capacity. You overlay sound on landscape to produce a kind of soundscape. You can completely change the experience of space through sound. I mean, if you're listening to music in a horrible room, the room doesn't look so bad somehow, right? There's something that sound does, and it's very deep, and it really modifies space. So I was interested in entering the questions and explorations that I undertook in the novel through sound and through a meditation on sound.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating, truly fascinating. So can you talk to us a little bit about the couple in the novel? They are artists. Why did you choose to make them artists? They fall passionately in love, work on a soundscape project together, and then their marriage begins to unravel. Can you talk a little bit about why you chose to make them artists?
I think the husband is definitely like an experimental sound artist, but the narrator and wife of this sound artist, she's more like a journalist who for a while devotes herself to a project with him that is like midway between journalism, documentation, and art. They involve themselves in a recording of all the sounds of New York City, and they together are in charge of recording all the languages spoken in the city. It's a kind of anthropological, sociological art project that then they finish, and then they go on a journey together. But by then, he's pursuing interests, disciplinary, artistic interests that don't really involve her, and she starts to have an internal conflict between going back to her roots as a sort of hardcore political journalist versus kind of dangling more in a disciplinary space like sound art. So they're not really both art, and especially she is not. She's in a constant interior conflict about basically, I mean, the bottom line of the conflict, I'd say, is exactly about how you document political violence and moments of social humanitarian crisis.
Mm-hmm. So the book is incredibly rich. It's filled with references, with ephemera, with songs and maps and books and lists of books. Can you tell us how the structure of the book, which is so unique, really revealed itself to you? Did you know right away what you wanted to accomplish, or was it part of the discovery, the process? Did you?
Yeah, it was definitely the second thing you're saying, a part of a discovery. I never know where I'm going exactly when I begin to write a book. I mean, first of all, I never know if I'm going to write in Spanish or in English, which is very important to figure out. And it often takes me a while. In this book, it took me at least a year to decide upon a language. And for 1 year at least, I was just making notes in both languages and trying out tones and perspectives. And I was never convinced until I was convinced about one tone, one language. Second, I never know about the genre. I oscillate to the point where I stop writing a book and then write an essay and then come back to the book. And then I don't know, of course, I don't know what the architecture is going to look like. I need to start from the inside to slowly produce the entire building. Like I have to start with a room and like explore it really well, and then and then slowly grow outward toward a clear architecture. And it's only really when I have a lot of material written that I can really start playing around with it and figuring out form. I think also I'd rather not write than write a novel that's like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, thinking of like beginning, middle, end, climax. No, like I really would rather do anything else than think of that as my craft. And because like I'm not disciplined in the sense that I won't write if I'm not interested in what I'm writing. I also think that it's really mean to readers to write if you're not passionate about what you're writing. If you're getting bored with yourself, imagine the disappointment and boredom for anybody else. So where my focus always has to be is keeping alive the fire of an enthusiasm for the things that I'm writing, and part of that fire is kindled and rekindled by my not knowing, but my having to discover where to every time I sit down. There's a kind of vertigo, like there's a vertigo that needs to be there, so that you are taking a risk, and risk is, I think, very thrilling on the page. I mean,
incredibly
very nerdy risk.
As a reader, you feel it. You feel that, definitely. So the family have boxes where they keep things, and you have a list of the contents. Can you tell us more about the boxes and their significance? That was something that was really kind of fascinating.
The boxes are still living in that closet, actually. I'm embarrassed to say.
Oh my God.
Because I made them, because at some point, and I think my family thought I was going crazy.
Can you pull one out?
What?
I'm kidding. Can you pull one out? No, I'm kidding.
I can't pull one out, but if you need a demonstration.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, I don't know if you can see from there.
Oh my God, yes, there they are. That is so cool.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, the Zoom era has these moments of weird intimacy. God, I actually really just showed people, I don't know who people, but in a very messy closet. I started making those boxes because I wasn't sure if I was conceiving them spatially and conceptually in the right way. And I also have a deep mistrust for my own sense of size in space. I mean, I never know how to pack a suitcase. It takes me hours to pack a suitcase because I always miscalculate. Mm-hmm. So I started mistrusting what I was writing in terms of like what fit in those boxes. Oh, for those of you who don't know what the hell we're talking about, these boxes, both narrator and her husband in the novel have their research material traveling with them in the backseat of, not in the backseat, in the backseat of the car are their children, and in the trunk of the car are these boxes, these 7 boxes, where fundamentally the husband has stuff. He's occupying more space than everyone else, as sometimes happens with husbands. And she has 1 box with her research material, and then the kids say, well, if you have boxes, we want boxes too. So they have their own boxes, which are traveling empty most of the way. But because these boxes had to kind of be realistic, for me, it was very important that they were. I had to buy them and start playing around with contents and see if actually like the books and archives and files and scraps and objects that I said were there could actually fit in a box. That, which, as I was saying earlier, really worried my family, because I guess if you looked at me from the outside, it was weird to see an adult putting things in and out of boxes for some weird purpose that was not moving houses or anything. It really helped me because I was able to start playing conceptually with the content of the boxes and just seeing the books there, like, okay, what happens to these books? How are they resignified when they're constellated together by being in the same space? Or what happens if you have in the same box a Bible and also a file full of migrant mortality reports at the border, plus Pedro Páramo by Juan Rulfo, plus Ezra Pound's cantos? Like, how do those elements of or form a constellation, right? And how does that constellation resignify each of the elements present in it? And so I started playing around a lot more and understanding things about the novel that I hadn't yet understood. So yeah, so I made the boxes, but once I made them, they became like someone else's. So I feel like in that closet, I have like suitcases that friends have left here saying that they'll come back and get them one day, things that don't belong to me, basically. And these boxes are one of things.
Well, they exist. I mean, that is really fascinating. So there are also, I wanted to talk about the Polaroid pictures that the boy leaves for his sister, along with the last recording. How were those made? Are those also, let me just show some of these amazing pictures. Did you shoot these?
Yeah, I shot most of them.
And
some of them I got help from my kids and stepkids and nieces and nephews, depending on, but most of them I took myself. But I did get help from the kids in my family, because these Polaroids it's quite a process. You don't just take them and not like the ones we used to have, or at least when I was a kid, where you just shook the Polaroid. These, because of the way that they're developed now, if they're hit by the light when they come out of the camera, no image will ever be developed in them. They just come out burnt.
They're so beautiful.
So as soon as they come out, they have to be hidden away in like inside a book or like in a coat pocket or something. So it takes some production to make them. But yeah, most of them are taken by me. And I mean, all of them, but some with help of.
Incredible. Again, it's just unique. Such a unique book. There's even like, am I crazy, or I'm not entirely sure if Echo Canyon, is that one long sentence?
It is.
Okay, that to me was just fascinating as well. It was like, oh my God, what is she doing? Yeah, it's one long sentence with no period. Anyway,
the graphic representation of that sentence is this map. this map
Incredible.
here. And it's one sentence that changes perspective. It goes from a third person present tense to a first person. So from a third person present tense to a first person past tense. And that's these two perspectives, and they're centered around this point here, which is like a point in the sky that the two narrators, 2 children traveling down and 7 children traveling up, are seeing and have in common as a common horizon. And it's a storm that's brewing in the sky. And every time either of the sort of groups of children, pair of children, group of children, look up at the sky to check on the status of the storm, the sentence switches perspective from here to here, from here to here. So, but what is happening in that sentence is that children are migrating, well, they have migrated, and they're walking from the border to this point in this valley. And then the 2 children in the novel, brother and sister, are traveling, and then that's where they meet. Yeah.
Unbelievable. So can I ask you just a little bit about what you've been doing during the pandemic, and on the eve of this such an important election, how are you feeling? Do you have hope that things will change?
I'm an optimistic human being, so I have hope that there will be a change of administration. But we've been there before, where everyone thought one thing and exactly the opposite happened, where a lot of people thought one thing and we were wrong. So I'm cautiously optimistic. But I'm also realistic in that I don't think that Biden's arrival is going to change things dramatically. And I think this administration has been so aggressive in so many ways and so inhumane that I do think some things will change very radically. But many others won't. And I think it's exactly the moment in which people who lean left should not be content with having sort of returned the White House to the Democrats. I think that it's exactly when the fight begins to make sure that they don't continue separating families at the border, that they really implement programs with green energy, that they really keep their word about things that they really might not. I mean, at the end, they're all politicians. It's all like so complicated and mixed in with economic interests. I mean, the Democrats have been saying that the prison industrial complex is one thing that needs to be dismantled, that it should no longer be privatized, that prison should not be private property, but something handled by the state. Let's see, because there's so many economic, of course it has to be dismantled. I really don't trust that they will do it unless we as a society are very engaged and very demanding. We just don't sit back and relax. So in that sense, I more than hopeful, I remain realistic and think that we need to get ready to continue the fight, even though we're exhausted. I think we're exhausted as a society, but we just need to find the energy that we have and understand where and how we're going to use it, or the little energy that we have left, place it in the right place. And yeah.
So I want to remind the audience that we want your questions as well. We have a very shy audience. So please go ahead and post your questions. I'm going to keep talking with Valeria, but as soon as I see some, I'll be happy to come back and ask your questions of her. So I want to take you back to bookstores. And I want to ask you, what do bookstores mean to you? There's a scene in the book where the character visits a bookshop. And of course, I liked it very much. But I also wanted to mention, and I don't want to make too much of this, but when I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, the character buys 2 books. And they're the exact same 2 books that I once bought at Books and Books before I worked there many, many, many years ago.
That's funny.
The Lover and the screenplay of Hiroshima Mon Amour. So I don't know. Your character also says that she superstitiously reads. You know, if a book opens to a certain page, she can't resist reading it. And then also she underlines. There's a lot of underlining going on with your character. Here we go. Here's a question. So maybe you can just tell us what have bookstores meant in your own life?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. They are both libraries and bookstores, spaces that that have been profoundly significant. They are both spaces are ones in which thought and ideas become kind of mobilized, right? Being around books, browsing, seeing, looking for something, but then finding something else, understanding how something is cataloged and how sort of a little universe is composed inside a bookstore. And when you were asking earlier about what I've been doing in the pandemic, I mean, among the many things that I've been doing has been missing bookstores and visiting bookstores in person and browsing and finding things that I wasn't looking for. And one of the things that I thought about a lot in the pandemic was sort of the cartography of bookstores. You know, like I go to a city, the first place I usually go to is the bookstore that I know there. Like it's like a way of like finding home base every time, right? And the thought of many bookstores struggling really made me worried and anxious. And the thought of many bookstores closing during the pandemic, but closing forever in the aftermath of the economic crisis that we are already seeing the beginning of, really, really, really worried me. And you will remember that, like, for example, Amazon stopped
prioritizing
books. And so I was like, you know, these
and we were like, hooray!
We know, I mean, yeah, hooray. And also, like, what would happen in a world in which, like, we only relied on Amazon for our books? Like, that's it. Like, they could completely close the doors for books to be available to humanity if, like, independent bookstores disappear and there's just no way to get books except through this monopolic horrible giant. So I started thinking, and I started talking to booksellers that I know, and we developed this small, very simple idea that I keep on telling people about because I want it to grow and circulate, which is very simple. I teach, like many writers, I teach in a college. And usually colleges have some kind of relationship with a Barnes and Noble consortium, like a bookstore that provides like text, not only text,
right? The on-campus bookstore,
yeah. Or really, mostly students buy books online on Amazon because it's kind of the passive, easy thing to do. So I thought, how could one like ensure that these younger generations simply do not even think of Amazon as a possibility for buying books? And so the idea was to start like a series of conversations between students, large group of students, and we've done like 3 or 4 of them where I teach now, between students and groups of booksellers who talk about book trade, who talk about why they became booksellers, who talk about the trade itself of bookselling, what has been happening now, sort of like bring a human face to this beautiful and absolutely necessary part of our trade. And I think it has been pretty eye-opening for students, but the idea is that this is a way in which personal, intimate relationships, like real relationships between a younger generation and booksellers across the country begins, so that students, if they need a book, they write to Books and Books, so they write to Stephen Sparks at Point Reyes, or Suchi at Brookline, and all these booksellers that they know they know their catalog, they know what books are worth reading, they have taste, they have knowledge, they read so much. So I think that, you know, if all of us can, I mean, I don't buy books on Amazon, but I think if a younger generation just
I've never bought anything on Amazon.
good for you.
Zero. So
Good
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're right. And then I was actually finished with this point. But yeah, if any of you that are listening teach, please just tell your students to get in contact with booksellers, invite booksellers to speak, make it part of the syllabus that your students reach out to booksellers to ask them about books that are being written about extractivism or mining or immigration or wars or the history of the 17th century, whatever, right? Whatever it is that they're interested in and reading, have them reach out to booksellers. And there's a lot of booksellers with specialties as well, right? There's I mean, I was just talking about Stephen Sparks at Point Reyes. He is one of the persons in the country, I think, that knows the most about environmental writing. So it's like always someone that's going to give you good advice about nature writing, environmental studies.
That's fantastic. I want to know him. So yes, we often have tours that we bring. We bring schools in, and the booksellers talk to them, and actually tell them exactly what you're saying. You know, well, what is a bookseller, and how do you become one, and how, you know, can you go to school to do that? Like, what do you need to study? And so it's always remarkable when they connect the dots and actually kind of. And I've also adore seeing for the first time when there are young people in the audience who have never really stepped foot or experienced an in-person live reading, and they're just like, they're agog, you know, it's like, and you can tell that that something has been sparked in them, you know, and I always, you know, like to stand in the back of the store and just watch that and watch their faces, and it is a beautiful thing. So we have a question. Yay! Okay, this is from Barbara DeMarco Barrett, and she would like you to see if you can talk more about how you write a novel. What I heard you say is traditional structure is not for you. So how do you go on? How do you know where to go?
It's a very hard question. There's no formula. It's a combination, I think, of remaining perceptive to both your own instincts and to the material or reality that you are interested in exploring, right? So that, you know, so that you're not imposing. You have a series of questions about something. Like if you want to write a book about loneliness in childhood, right? It's not about imposing a view on, like, an already made view on this question, because that's not interesting. It's more about like taking a very deep dive and trusting that your instinct, your questions, that the question that you're asking about material like this, questions like this, are going to guide you. And it's hard because you have to be patient, because if you don't know what the end result is going to be, trusting that you're going the right way in the little bits of the road is very hard. And sometimes you lose your way, or you lose faith in a project. But it's that there you have to be stubborn and trusting, and just continue exploring, like with a great commitment to what you're exploring. And I think, I mean, so far, for me, it's always been the case that the material itself, once I've sort of really like produced significant amount of research, and I'm not talking here about like academic research, but when I've written and I have like a good mass of something substantial somehow, then I can start shaping it into something. And actually the word fiction comes from the Latin fingere, and fingere means to shape clay, to make something out of something that was already there. And I think of fiction a lot in that way. It's not kind of sitting down, seeing what like pops up in your head. And no, it's more like there is something there, and the whole challenge is how to give shape to that something that is already there.
What a wonderful answer. What a wonderful response. So Gaston would like to know, what are you working on now?
Yeah, I'm working on a couple of things, but the central project that I'm working on is a sound piece, like a sound essay that's choral. It has many female voices, and it is a 24-hour sound piece. 24 hours is the amount of time that it takes to drive kind of straight line from one extreme of the US-Mexico border in Texas to the other extreme in San Diego, Tijuana. That's 24 hours. So it's a 24-hour sound piece that tells the story of violence against land and against particularly the female body from the 19th century till now. And the 19th century, because that was when the border took the shape that it has today. Previously, as you know, there wasn't a border there. It began being drawn during the Spanish explorations in the 16th century, but it fixed in its final, I don't think it's probably going to be final, but in its final form, the way we know it today, in 1854, 55, with after the war, which was in the 1840s, almost 10 years later, with the Gadsden Purchase in Arizona. So it's a soundscape, I guess.
I love your inquisitiveness and your playfulness and your restlessness with everything, you know, like, and that's such a creative trait. Oh my gosh. So here's from Kevin. He says, I'm a big fan. Was the story of my teeth based in something true? Like, is there really an old auctioneer in Mexico selling famous people's teeth?
No, but the character is based very much on an uncle of mine who unfortunately passed away a little bit over a year ago, called Pepe. And Pepe was a salesman, and he worked in a big market in Mexico City called the Central de Abastos, where you find basically anything. From cars to like Ramon Serrano, to dodgy things, to like live animals, like exotic, like really it's a kind of like umbilical center of the world somehow. Very interesting market. And he used to be a salesman. He was a salesman since he was a little boy. He happened to be extremely charismatic and very good at, as we say in Spanish, he was very dicharachero. He had this like thing, he had a sway, like a swag. And he was, my mother's family was a family with 9 children, and their father worked in a factory. So the children worked from early on in their lives since they were children. And my Uncle Pepe was sent to work as one of those people that stand outside a store announcing what they have inside the store. But he worked as a 12-year-old in a lingerie, intimate clothing, mostly for women's stores. So, but he charmed the ladies. I don't know what he said to them. This must have been in the 1950s. And then he became a door-to-door salesman of underwear as well. And he had the most fantastic stories. He, by the time that when I was writing this book, but much before that actually too, had false teeth, and always said that he got his teeth thanks to his great capacity to sell whatever he sold. And he sold everything. Like he changed trades and salesmanship 1,000 times. He sold jamon serrano for a while. He sold cars for a while. He just tried everything. But he was a wonderful, lively, charismatic, adorable human being who then used to come to my readings in Mexico City when The Story of My Teeth was published there, and used to tell everybody, I am Highway. I am Highway is the best. Yeah.
Oh, what a wonderful story.
He was a wonderful character. He taught the family humongous lesson when he died. He really taught us a lesson in dying, which is a lesson in living at the end. And he had a very bad colon cancer. He was friends with everyone in the cancer ward. I went to visit him one day, and I took him from where he was to just get X-rays. And everybody, the nurses, everyone, Pepe, hello. And he would say really funny things to there was a guy that also had cancer, but was much better off than him. My uncle was by that point really, really sick, and this guy looked like he was going to be okay. But Pepe, my uncle, would say uy, te ves muy mal, you're going to die, you look terrible, man. And everyone understood his sense of humor and appreciated it. And when he knew that he wasn't going to make it at all, and he had days left, he asked to leave the hospital. And he asked the family to come together in a great big dinner party. And he asked my brother to cook a humongous paella, which my brother did, buena zarzuela, really. And my uncle couldn't eat then because he didn't have almost any organs anymore to digest. But he ate an enormous plate of zarzuela. People sang. Everyone was there around him. And then the last thing he said to the family was, see you tomorrow in the funeral parlor at Galloso. And he died after, but it was a way to live, or a way to die, that was such an example of just, I don't know, understanding something deep about parting from this world, right?
What a beautiful, beautiful death. What a beautiful, wow. More power to him. Amazing. So here's someone who's curious about which writers or which books you return to again and again.
Yeah, that's a good question. There are many. I return to Joseph Brodsky. I return to Marguerite Duras. And you know what? In this pandemic, I've been returning to old books, old houses almost or old cities that we know, places that we used to know, spaces that we know well, and that in a moment like this, where I think we've been so lost, emotionally lost, psychologically lost, it's been great for me at least, to reread a lot. And Marguerite Duras, Joseph Brodsky, I studied as a university graduate. I studied philosophy, and so I reread some of the philosophers that I read back in those years, like Hannah Arendt and Maria Zambrano. Hannah Arendt and Maria Zambrano especially. And who else do I reread often? I have problems with the man, but I like the writer, and I reread T.S. Eliot a lot as well. There are many, I guess.
So here's a related question. Can you tell us some of your favorite authors and influences too?
Idem. Same
The same. Okay.
Same as before. Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like we do not have any more questions, but I would like to ask you just to say something about growing up. You grew up in so many different places. How does that inform the person you become and how you look at the world?
it's impossible to say, because I don't know who I would have been had my life not been this way. So, I mean, the only this insight that I can offer about this is that moving around a lot in one's life forces you to become a very meticulous and patient observer of human behavior, because you have to learn the codes every time. You have to relearn the codes of living and interacting every single time. And it's a matter of survival, especially when you're in middle school, high school. It's hard to survive. You don't understand cultural codes, so you are forced to become a very good observer. And I think that, I mean, one of the things that I'm very thankful for is that, like, I was forced, because of my life experience, to always sort of sit back and observe, rather than jump in and interact immediately, or I mean, my space has been the space of the observer, I believe.
So this is a note from Kevin saying that he cried at the answer about Uncle Pepe and the story of my teeth, and he feels like in that answer he missed him as much as you do.
Thank you.
That's pretty remarkable. So Valeria, I wonder if you would grace us with a short reading to end the program.
Be a very short reading, because we have 2 minutes left, and my family knows that it's my turn to make pasta. So,
and you don't have to if you don't want to. I mean, seriously.
You know what? Let's leave it here, because I don't want
to leave it here.
I want a long discussion, and also
Yes.
I'll get into really bad trouble with the rest of my bunch.
I
live
just
in an all-woman household, and the rules about how we
are very
decide our chores are very clear. So it's my turn to cook. So salute everybody.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and
Thank
I
you
hope
very
that we'll see you in person at Books and Books very soon.
Yes.
And until then, be well and keep doing what you do so brilliantly.
You
and
too.
thank you
Take
to
care.
everyone that's watching. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Bye-bye.
Bye.